Welcome to another video from 1000 Days Sober. My name is Lee Davey. I'm not an alcoholic. I refuse to be anonymous. I am someone that doesn't drink alcohol, and I spend every waking moment of my life helping other people do the same. Like right now, we're going to get involved in a conversation about the Great British Pub, or if you live in America, the Great American Pub, or bar as you like to call it. And if you live in the Southern Hemisphere, I don't know what you call it. Do you call it a pub or a bar? Let me know down below, okay? And the reason I'm getting to this topic is during the 1000 Days Sober experience, which is currently rocking and rolling, and you can join it anytime you want. You just go to www.1000dayssober.com and sign up. Pardon me. During that, the progress of Paul, he was doing an exercise on foreboding joy in the stuck phase of the Strive Model for Change, when he started talking about his experiences in the pub, right? And how, he's been really excited about his progress, but he's not been able to celebrate it because he keeps telling himself that the only reason he's doing so well is he's been stuck in the house in lockdown the last 3 months. And that if the pub was open, then he would have a problem. So he's foreboding his joy. Why is that a problem? Well, we want to celebrate our wins, right? Like, in order for us to migrate from being someone who drinks alcohol to someone who doesn't drink alcohol, we need to shift the balance of power between pain and pleasure. And we need to keep giving ourselves pats on the back that this is the right thing to do. We're doing all the right things. We're making all the right moves, and our life is better. And if we're foreboding joy, then that acts as a block to vulnerability, and it acts as a block to progress. Okay, so I wanted to talk about this in more depth. So I reached out to the strivers and I asked them a couple of questions. One is, why is or was avoiding the pub such a challenge for you? If you no longer go to the pub, how does that make you feel? What have been your alternatives, and what are your thoughts on going to the pub while trying to quit alcohol? Interestingly, only a few people responded to this one, and they were all male. And in the UK, that is part and parcel of the culture. Whereas women will definitely go to the pub, they're not likely to become regulars in the same way that men are, in the same volume. There are regulars who go to the pub. Particularly, I find certain pubs or clubs, like social clubs, that I found where I grew up. My mum, for example, is a regular at a local club. But she wouldn't spend the time that the barflies would spend in it, like I did when I used to drink alcohol, or some of the people on Strive. So it's not a surprise that this is kind of like an all-male conversation. But I will echo some thoughts that Striver Sue made on going to the pub a little bit later on when I summarize my thoughts. But I'm going to start with Paul, who was a person who was actually foreboding his joy, worried that when he, the only reason he's doing really well is he's not going to the pub. And Paul actually says that, paradoxically, he actually doesn't feel that triggered when he goes to the pub. So he can actually identify that this foreboding of joy is resistance playing around with him, because he actually, in reality, he doesn't have a problem when he goes to the pub, and he rarely gets triggered. So that in itself is, the net result of being someone who doesn't drink alcohol and being really aware of how your brain's functioning and the bullshit that it generally spews out, or resistance spews out. So I think that's really cool. Paul says he drinks non-alcoholic beers when he goes to the pub. And he says for him, he has to have a reason to go that's outside of drinking. So a lot of us just go to the pub to meet up and drink. Paul is saying, as someone who doesn't drink alcohol, he goes to the pub to watch football. He goes to, because he really enjoys karaoke, or he'll go to eat out. He obviously has a pub that makes good grub. Nothing like my local then. And but Paul says there is still some value in going to the pub and just meeting his mates. And he thinks that the pub has a different vibe to coffee shops and restaurants and other non-alcoholic hangouts. And unfortunately, more and more of these non-alcoholic hangouts are providing alcohol alternatives, which is a sad shame, but that's the way it is. And so Paul thinks that, the pub is different. It has a different vibe, okay? But he has no problem going to the pub. and neither does Craig. Craig is a member of the 1K Club, and Craig says that the pub was the main place that he drank when he was a drinker. He talks about the sunshine. When the sunshine comes out, he's from the UK, so the sun doesn't come out that often. When the sunshine comes out, the drinking calls you, right? The pub garden calls you, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. Craig actually thinks that there's going to be a few problems post-lockdown, while everybody just kind of vaults themselves into the pub and starts drinking more and more because they think they've missed something. But he doesn't have a problem going to the pub. The way that Craig uses his pub life, or did in the past, is this similar to me. He plays poker in the pub. So there's Paul saying watches football, does karaoke, eats food. Now Craig saying he plays poker, right? You know, it's all these are things outside of drinking alcohol. I'm just going to quote exactly what Craig said in the next couple of paragraphs. He said, "I've been to more lively pubs and bars though," he said, "and they're more complicated. In my early days of not drinking, I slipped up a couple of times when being in those types of pubs and bars. There are certain situations or events where everyone else is drinking and there's a real pressure to fit in and to conform. He said he still goes to these places and he has to be aware that there may be triggers and he'll have some obstacles to overcome. And this is after going 1,000 days sober. So just think about that. And my opinion of going to the pub," he says, "whilst trying to quit is that it's playing with fire, especially if that's where most of the drinking was done. Lots of triggers, pressure to contend with, peer pressure, and in the early days, that's really hard to deal with. For me," says Craig, "it took a lot of time before he could go to a pub with confidence that he wouldn't drink. A year," he says, "it took him. I found it easier to avoid the pub altogether and only go back there once I knew I could deal with it. And even then, he did it with trepidation." Okay. The third person to respond was Tony. And Tony says he doesn't go to the pub that often anymore. And his problem is actually drinking at home, not going to the pub. He says he doesn't enjoy the banter when he's sober. Now, for those of you that need subtitles, the banter's the crack, the laugh. Like, he doesn't enjoy the communication, basically, and the camaraderie with his mates when he's sober. And he says, "If my mates are meeting at the pub first before going on to a restaurant, I'll skip the pub and go straight to the restaurant. A pub is not really a place for me to go when others are just standing around drinking. I can go and watch the footy and have soft drinks and that's okay, but I cannot tolerate watching my mates drink when there's no other entertainment." Tony, like Paul, will also drink non-alcoholic beers. So there's a viewpoint of three blokes from the UK. They're all in their 30s, 40s or 50s. And that's what they think of pub life. So I'm going to share my viewpoints of what they've said and my viewpoints on this old pub lark as well. On Paul's view on the pub being different to, say, Starbucks, okay? I want to draw your attention to the fact that as human beings, we are story-making machines, okay? We have our own personal experiences and we create stories around those that help us to very quickly make decisions and navigate ourselves through life. Okay, and Paul obviously has a story, which most people do, and I probably did, that the pub is different. There's a different vibe to it than, say, Starbucks. Okay, and until probably 6 months ago, I might have agreed with him. But since then, new evidence has come to light and I've created a new story. And because of that, I can now shift the faith that I had in the perception that the pub was different, and I can switch it to a different belief. And because I'm switching that faith, this means that my belief that the pub is different and has a special kind of vibe to it is now weakened and lessened, so it has less power over me as I switch that faith to a different belief. Okay, Paul is capable of doing that, but he needs to experience it first for himself, like I have, in order for him to get that injection of hope and confidence that he's ready to switch his faith to a different belief system. So what is that switch? Well, for me, this is what happened. I've been going to a Starbucks in Tahunga in California on and off for a couple of years now. And just recently, I was going to go to the UK pre-lockdown and I sent them a card. It was a goodbye card, and I just said, I'm going back to UK for 6 months. Thank you for looking after me. And once I sent that card, everybody knew my name. Everybody welcomed me by my first name. They all knew what I wanted to drink and had my drink there. They came over to me to talk to me. They really went out of their way to make me feel like Starbucks was my living room. At the same time that was going on, I noticed that there are several regulars at Starbucks in the same way that there are regulars at the bar. And I started talking to some of them and sitting with them and getting to know them. And all of a sudden, once lockdowns ended, if I go to Starbucks now, I don't walk in like I used to with my head down, set my stuff up on my chair on my own, go and order a drink and just go through the fake interactions that we do with people and the small talk, how's the weather, how's life, all that kind of bollocks, right? That doesn't happen anymore. I walk into Starbucks and I go, yo, folks, and everyone goes, yo, Lee, how's it going? And then I'll just be shaking hands as I'm going down to the regs. And then I'll go over, they'll get my drink ready for me. I'll go and sit next to one of the regs and we'll start having a chat about life. And then I'll put my headphones on and I'll say, I've got to change the world now. Please forgive me. I've got to get into my work. And they know me and I get into it, right? Starbucks has become a pub to me. Now remember, this feeling that Paul's talking about is about his pub being very different, having a different vibe. I wonder, Paul, if you're watching this, would the vibe be any different if you was in a different pub? So are you talking about the vibe of your local being different to other pubs? If you are, then let's think about the fact that in order for that local to feel different and to have that familial feeling for you, you have to spend a lot of time in there. We can't just like walk into a gaff and own the place. It doesn't work like that because we won't know the people in there. We won't know the environment. We won't know kind of the rules of decorum. So on Paul's view on the pub being different, yeah, I used to believe that. I don't believe that anymore. I believe it is well in our power as people that don't drink alcohol to take the pub vibe and put it somewhere else. That could be at Starbucks. It could be in the library. It could be at a local coffee shop that you work at, or cafe that you work at, right? It doesn't matter where it is, but you can choose to go there and have a different, and bring that pub vibe if you want to. It's a choice, right? But for me, the pub being special, it's just a story, okay? Paul drinks non-alcoholic beers when he's in a pub. I know Tony drinks non-alcoholic beers as well. Tony drinks alcoholic drinks as well. He's still kind of like formulating in his head about what he wants to do with that, and whether or not he wants to go 1,000 days sober. So we'll see where he goes with that. But whenever somebody talks about or shares their interest in non-alcoholic beers, a red light goes on for me. And we've talked about this in a previous video, and please check it out. Okay, I don't know the title of it, but you'll find it. It's the one where we talk about whether or not we should drink non-alcoholic beers and if they have any value or not. The light goes on because I think it's masking something. And for me, with alcoholism being an invisible, violent, and dominant belief system, and it being a non-relational system, and the antidote to that system being one of relational literacy, then if we are drinking non-alcohol beers just so we can fit in, and we don't have to face any uncomfortable questions, then I don't think that is savvy in terms of relational literacy. I think it's a growth impediment, right? In terms of communication. It's not allowing us to be uncomfortable, okay? Now, this is very different if someone says, oh, reason I drink non-alcoholic drinks is I really love the taste of non-alcoholic drinks. Again, I'm very dubious on that because there are so many different options of drinks that we can drink that are nice. I'm not saying that maybe not in the pub, right? But my boy Jude, who's 19, I was talking to him the other day about, when lockdown ends and I go back to Starbucks to be working and back with my crowd, will I drink decaffeinated coffee anymore? Because I've been on an elimination diet for 6 weeks and I haven't drank it and I feel good without it. And Jude said, well, you don't have to. And I said, well, I think the habit and addiction and the environment and the triggers will take over more than me wanting really to drink the alcohol. I think it's going to be more complicated than that. And Jude said to me, well, every time I go to my local pub and my mates are drinking, I just drink water because I don't want to drink. And it reminded me of when I used to go to the pub as someone who doesn't drink alcohol, and I never wanted to drink either. So I would just take my tea bags and I would ask the landlord to make me a cup of tea, and I'd chuck him £1 for electricity. Jude said that the bar staff are always complaining he's never buying anything. And it's those complaints that add to the kind of like, the peer pressure that we feel. But we could go to a pub. We don't have to buy anything. We can buy a bag of crisps if we want. We don't have to buy alcohol, right? And that is a really important point. If a 19-year-old can buy a pint of water, just order a pint of water in amongst a group of 19-year-olds, and Jude's 19-year-old buddies, they're all kind of like drinking and doing the thing that teenagers do. If he can do it, anybody can do it, right? So, I would just question, why is it that I'm drinking non-alcoholic beers? Is this because I really like them? Is this the thing really? Or does it mean that I'm trying to mask a problem that I don't want to confront with my friends, which is not relational? Okay, it is non-relational, and that's not the habit that we want to get into if we want to be someone who doesn't drink alcohol. And what does that mean if we're trying to sever this complicated relationship with alcoholism as an invisible, violent, dominant belief system, that we're still drinking a fluid that tastes exactly the same as the fluid we're trying to stop drinking in the same setting where we used to drink it? That's like a heroin addict going to his old junkie spot with a needle full of something else and just shooting up around his mates this sugar water, and watching all his mates around him just fucking fall into that kind of like idyllic kind of bliss or whatever they think it is, because I've never taken heroin, and then him not wanting to do it. Come on, like, your advice to that heroin addict would be stay away from that place, stay away from those people, stay away from that environment, stay away from that trigger. So why would we want to go to a pub and drink non-alcoholic beer? Like Craig said, he's playing with fire. I agree with you, Craig. The sunshine thing is a big thing. It is in the UK. When the sun comes out, you feel like urge to go out and drink alcohol. But it's just a story. It's just a story you've told yourself. Nobody liked the beer garden more than me. Nobody, when the sun came out, drunk as much as I did where I lived. I don't even think about it anymore. I don't even think about it. Because the connection between, oh, the sun's out, I must drink, to me now just seems ludicrous. Like, the sun's out, I must go out and spend some time with my family. The sun's out, I might go and sunbathe for a bit. The sun's out, I might do some gardening maybe, but not the sun's out, I'm just going to drink myself into a stupor and dehydrate myself. Like, if you look at these stories and you look at them from a rational and logical lens, and you do it often enough, it loses that power. Like Craig, I play poker. I think it's really important where the guys are saying they do things that they enjoy. I'd go one further, and I would say do things where drinking alcohol is less likely to happen. So Paul goes and does the karaoke. I imagine people drink more to get on the karaoke. But when you play poker, in general, people don't want to lose their money. So what I found in my local when we play poker is most people who were playing, they weren't really drinking as much as they used to. And the ones that did, there was something about that concentrated effort of playing the game that meant it took them much, much longer, if ever, to get into that almost ridiculous, nonsensical state. So I had a friend called Gary Ackerman, for example. He would drink and drink and drink while we were playing poker. I could still have a conversation with him when he's on his 8th pint, in the same way I could have a conversation when he's on his 1st pint. Now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, his faculties are diminishing all the time, but we're not talking about deep, meaningful stuff. We're just chewing the fat while we're having a game of poker. So I think having another reason to go into the pub is really important. Otherwise, you are like on thin ice. And playing poker or something where the people you're playing with are not going to drink that much, and drinking is not the sole focus. So suddenly, I could see drinking being a focus of karaoke. I don't see drinking being a focus of poker. The game and the money is the focus of poker. So yeah. And on Craig saying you're playing with fire, I want to bring in Sue, who didn't comment on this, but she said this before. When Sue was trying to give up drinking for many, many years, I keep saying to her, you got to get out of the pub, because it kept coming up in triggers again and again and again. And the addict in her kept justifying why it was okay to go to the pub and kept denying that it was a problem. You know, no, my problem is drinking at home. It's not drinking in the pub. And it weren't until she eventually stopped going to the pub that she realized how much of a power dynamic it had over her in terms of her overarching addiction to alcohol and how complicated it is. And she said to me, if I could have had a crystal ball and saw that I can leave the pub and I can actually go back when I feel confident, like Craig said, it took him a year. I can leave the pub for a year and then I can go back. And then Sue realized that she could do that. But when she gets there, it's not really what she thought it was. She's seeing it through different eyes. Like she's seeing it through the eyes of someone who doesn't drink alcohol. She sees the value for what it is, which very often is a myth, right? So I just wanted to bring that in. I think it's really important. Tony said he doesn't enjoy the banter when sober. You know, that's a really important point. Doesn't enjoy the banter when he's sober. Why is that? Is that because he just feels uncomfortable being around people who are drinking? Or is that because actually the banter is not really interesting? And the fact that we never noticed that before is that we were drinking alongside them. You know, we were drinking alongside them. I'll give you an example. I have a way of talking. I have a certain tone. I have a certain accent. I use certain words, phrases, sentences and stuff. And it comes from my upbringing. And sometimes I'll use those words, not sometimes, all the time when I talk to my kids. And Zia being 3. And Liza, who's grown up in a different culture than me, often says to me, why do you talk to Zia like that? Like, why do you talk to her like that? And I'll defend myself because it seems like a real slight on my character. But when I stop defending, I think about it for a bit. I think to myself, do you know, I don't really want to talk to my daughter like that. I don't want to be telling her fart jokes and bum jokes. I don't want to be pulling moonies to her. I don't want to be, you know, talking to her in a too grown-up way when she's 3 or 4 years of age. Like, I don't want to be talking to her flippantly. I don't want to be sarcastic to her. All right? Because I've changed. My values have changed, and thankfully for me, I've got a wife who's not afraid to turn around and call me out. That your behavior with your daughter is not aligned with your values. When you become someone that doesn't drink alcohol, one of the key things that you need to do, and we cover this on a 1000 Day Sober Experience, is you need to start putting your values front and center and allowing your experience to emerge from that kind of starting point. So the gun goes off, poof, and off you go, but the starting blocks are your values. And if that happens, then you're not going to find the banter very interesting if suddenly you're thinking about life in very different ways. You're thinking about meaning, you're thinking about purpose, you're thinking about values, you're thinking about how you can improve your life. You're thinking about the Black Lives Matters march and how you can do your bit to help this kind of like screwed up situation we're in at the moment, right? You're thinking about all these things. You're thinking about the coronavirus and how it's impacting people and how the interactions are going and what you think about that, okay? You're not just going to the pub and just talking about stuff that's got no kind of deeper roots to it or no meaning to it. You know what I'm on about? Just like the dandruff kind of talk that just kind of falls off people's hair, you know, like, you know, how was your day at work today? Great, yeah, how was you? Yeah, I was the missus, well, you know, she puts her war paint on every now and then to come out on the weekend, etc., 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 right? So do we enjoy the banter? Okay. And this is part of the problem because a lot of people realize before it's even begun, the brain, they know, but resistance is stopping them from seeing it, is that actually I'm not going to like my friends very much when I start drinking alcohol. It's not about them not liking me. I'm not going to like them that much. Things are going to change and I'm not going to want to hang out with them. I still love them, but I'm just not going to want to hang out with them. And that is terrifying to some people because they then think they're going to be really, really lonely. And resistance doesn't want them to go through the hard work of walking into Starbucks, giving them a lovely card, getting to know them all so they eventually know your name and you don't feel lonely anymore, right? That's kind of what it's all about. And we have to remember, like I said before, and I'm going to repeat it, alcoholism is a non-relational system. Okay, so we need to improve our relational literacy to overcome that. And how can we do that if we're talking to somebody who's on a different planet, even if it's progressively on a different planet, because they're drinking more and more, right? Like I said, we wouldn't do this. We wouldn't go and hang around with heroin addicts, right? We wouldn't do that. So why are we hanging around with people who are getting drunk? We need to really question ourselves and make a different choice. Okay, we do. I'm saying here, I'm just reading my notes. We feel a combination of wanting to be alone and also connecting to others. But in reality, how much better is a meeting in a pub than a meeting online? So I'll give you an example. I'm currently doing the Science of Happiness course at Berkeley, and I was watching a video the other day and it was asking me what makes me happy. And earlier on in the day, I did an online support group, okay, with 1000 Days Sober. I led an online support group. And if you want to, you can join them every Monday and Wednesday, 11:30. Just go to www.1000dayssober.com and join up, right? So I was going to go on this, I was doing this leadership group. And when I do this, when I lead the group, I thrive. I love it. I love the responsibility of it. I love the baton kind of like leadership responsibility. I love imparting my knowledge and helping people. I just love the whole experience. And my joker comes out at me and I have a lot of fun and I make people laugh. And I have noticed that I get a lot of my happiness from the reactions of other people, like external sources. So when I make someone laugh and they laugh at me, the happiness for me comes from the other person laughing at me, not me making the joke, right? And I had a lovely, lovely time, and I came off there feeling really good. And I noted that, what makes me happy is when I do these online meetups, when I'm meeting all these people from all around the world and I'm talking to them and engaging on a real deep level, but having a good laugh at the same time, right? And that got me thinking, hang on, if I'm going to mark that out of 10, like how much did I enjoy that experience? It's going to be a 10. It was a 10 experience for me. Now, if I go back to my drinking days when I thought that hanging around the pub with my mates was brilliant, how often were those moments a 10, really and truly? Like, when it comes to like overall happiness, and let's not bullshit ourselves, how many times did we go to the pub and we woke up the next morning and we say, I had a fucking great time yesterday. But really, we can't even remember most of it because we kept blacking out. Like that for me is a disclaimer. We can't say we had a good time if we can't remember most of the night. Like we're not even in a position to rank ourselves. When we're not even in a position to rank ourselves, how can we beat the 10? I could tell you now with complete confidence that of all the times that I've had in a pub, and there are times when I've had incredible amounts of fun, the level of happiness that I've received out of that experience and the level of joy and connection and camaraderie is only different to the experience that I had earlier on in my online meeting in grades of milli something. There is the gradation of change is so infinitesimal that you can't even notice it. What I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, is whilst you think that being close together and being physically together is going to make you happier, it isn't going to make you happier. Just connecting with people online can make you just as happy. Yeah, you might be lacking a few, liters of oxytocin and serotonin and stuff, the kind of like chemicals that you get when you're physically with somebody. But aren't you getting that anyway with your wife, your husband, your kids who are here? So what's wrong with like doing your meeting like I did earlier on today, then going downstairs and giving your daughter a big squeeze to get that oxytocin that you're missing from the meeting? I know I'm talking nonsense here. What I'm saying is we create these stories that hanging around in a pub with our mates is amazing and brilliant and there's no other alternative. When of course there's an alternative. We just never measured accurately what is the whole point and purpose of going to the pub with our mates, right? Like, what is it? Is it to increase connection or is it to drink alcohol? If it's to increase connection, then going to the pub with your mates is not the right place to go with the pub with your mates. When I stopped drinking, I used to invite my friend Neil and Steve to the cinema with me because I used to go alone. We would meet in a coffee shop. We'd have a good laugh and a chat and a bantering and catch up. We'd go watch a movie, and then afterwards we'd go home. And we had a fantastic, great time and a good laugh. Nobody drank a single thing. Like, why do you need to go to the pub? So a lot of it is just storytelling, you know, and we need to be vulnerable enough to assess that and to talk about that. So, you know, if you want to be someone that doesn't drink alcohol, I keep echoing this point. You need to work on your relational literacy. You cannot work on your relational literacy talking to somebody who's out of it. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that. Similarly, Tone says not tolerating his mates. Not tolerating his mates. I can't tolerate my mates when they're drunk. That's what I'm talking about. But Tony, if you're watching this, you've got to ask yourself, why is that? Is that because I'm feeling a sense of deprivation? Like, oh, they're drinking alcohol, I'm not. So that's why I can't tolerate it. I feel lack, which if you do, that's a surefire way to end up drinking again, because we should never feel lack, because we're not giving anything up. And if we think we're giving something up, then we've got a real problem on our hands, okay? Or is it because it's boring? Is it because you can't tolerate them because they're just waffling on about shit? And it's getting increasingly louder, increasingly Alice in Wonderland, and you just are on the periphery of it because it's not what you want to talk about or how you want to behave, or, you know, it's just not where you want to be. You know, I would really, really ask yourself that question, Tony. Like, really ask yourself that question. Anyway, there you are. There's my thoughts and feelings on the great pub debate. What about you? Why is or was avoiding the pub such a challenge for you? And if you no longer go to the pub, how does it make you feel? What have been your alternatives? And what are your thoughts on going to the pub while trying to quit alcohol? Okay? Answer it down below. Get involved in the conversation, please. Thanks for listening. Oh, one more thing. If there's a topic you would like me and the Strivers to cover for you in more depth, leave a note down below and we'll get into it. All right? Keep on striving.